Let's discuss the most recent announcements that will be careening us towards the absolute totalitarianism of the complete Blairite state. Blairism is only a semi-complete project at the moment. Keir Starmer, being a Blairite himself, is pushing it through to the other edge, and that is what he was discussing in his speech on public sector reform yesterday, and it ties into a lot of the other changes that Labour are planning on making at the moment, including their New Britain plan, where there's going to be a greater and greater centralisation of the government, whilst also, and in an incredible level of doublespeak, bragging about how it's actually a decentralisation of the government. For instance, in the New Britain, have you looked into those plans that they put forward? I think it was originally written up by Brown and announced at the beginning or end of 2022, and it seems that they're starting to move forward with these plans where it's changes to the local council structures, where they're taking
the mayoral elections, which they're seeking to delay local elections this year in some areas.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, that's the European boundaries that they were trying to bring in the 70s. It's the European boundaries.
Well, the project
mayoral areas. It's all very interesting.
Well, the thing that they're trying to do is take a load of the more of the separate councils in particular counties, and then just bungle them all together into more larger unitary regional councils, which they're saying is a form of decentralisation, but sounds to me more like, well, you've got one...
These are the vehicles they'll bring in, the 15-minute cities and the low-traffic neighbourhoods and all the restrictions, and say, oh, it's not us, it's your locally elected mayoral candidate that's bringing these in, because that's how they're going to get the money in.
Yeah, well,
Harry, you'll remember the first piece of legislation in '97 that the new Blairite government... When I was
1 year old, yes.
Well, I expect you to remember, or something I should have told you. And if not, the first piece of legislation that Blair's government brought in '97, which was not in their manifesto, nobody saw it coming, and no one at the time, no one could understand it. But it all makes great sense now.
Mm.
They took the death penalty out of the Treason Act.
I think
what a strange thing.
What a strange thing. They must get that through straight away.
Yeah.
As if they knew exactly what they were going to be doing.
They also took away the annual vote in Parliament on the death penalty after a few years, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting as well.
But I think it's still the death penalty for crimes against humanity, so we're okay.
Don't worry, we're going to bring it back when we win.
That'll be our first move. No, but what I expect with these unitary councils will be that obviously you'll get massive central hubs looking after administering areas of...
Do you think that'll be lower local taxes or higher local taxes?
Oh, much higher, because what I expect is that instead of having, accountable local civil servants, they'll just be stuffed full of their own Labour Blairites who are going to make whatever decision
when I won the election in northwest Leicestershire against all the odds and got my friends in as the council, it's been always Labour, we put through the longest council tax freeze in UK history. 15 years we never raised the council tax.
God, I swear.
How about putting that back?
Good man.
We got
15 years.
We got a breakdown from the Swindon Council recently about what's your council tax being spent on. 80% of it is redistributive. 80%. So it's basically giving out free stuff to people.
Buying votes.
I covered
pork barrel politics.
80%.
I covered the one that came through a few years ago when I was still living here. I don't live here anymore, thank God. And it was, I think at the time...
No one lives here. They're existing.
Oh, yeah, I suppose so. What is living if you're in Swindon? But it was 80% of it was going to like the health and social care, which was millions and millions and millions of pounds, like tens of millions of pounds for, I think it was something less than 1,000 people.
Yep.
Which just sounded like a racketeer.
We're taking far too many children into care off their parents. I mean, in the country now, the people who are classed as poor, they're not really scared of the police. They are a bit, but they're more scared of social services because social services take your children away.
Yeah.
And that's a huge cost. There's far too much of that, and obviously local councils have got the burden of looking after the elderly as well. And since the COVID jab rollout, we've got a lot more people on long-term sick as well who can't work.
But speaking of
2 million
that aren't a huge cost, you should buy Islander, which is available on the website right now for £14.
Give this man a pay rise.
Pence, and it's only available for the next week. We're coming up to the last week of it being available, so get it whilst you still can. And while you're on there as well, why not pick up a t-shirt? We've got a new line of t-shirts and other merchandise available that you can get that's been beautifully designed as ever by Rory, and you can get that for the low price of $20.99. And again, for the Redditors in the audience, we go all the way up to 5XL now. So there you go. So the speech that was given was an hour long, and it was very dull and very boring, as you would expect, as these things are basically designed to be.
It's almost as if he didn't want anyone to listen to the detail.
Well, that's always the case. So the big announcement that came from the public sector reform, there are a few things that he mentioned in it. He wanted to do things that sound like they could be good, to be fair, which was the cutting away of certain business regulations by 25%. I don't know how exactly you figure out how much of the regulations equals 25%, but he was saying he wanted to do things for good local businesses. But the big one that came from this was...
And he'll pick the winners, will he? He's going to pick the good local businesses?
Well,
I would
obviously.
assume so. Or maybe the unitary councils will. The big thing that came from this was his announcement that he was going to abolish NHS England, which on the government website has been now called the largest quango in the world. Now, it's interesting to me that when you are a Blairite, heading a Blairite state who all agree with you, how things that were impossible under our previous government suddenly can just, under the Conservatives, can just be done like that. Can you imagine if the Conservatives, as Liz Truss was trying to do when she wanted to cut away parts of the state, had tried to do something as significant as this, when the actual reforms that were taken in 2012 are what set under the Tories are what set up the NHS England in the first place.
Could you ever imagine the last Tory administration trying to get removing the old age pensioners' winter fuel allowance through Parliament? Could never have happened.
Of course not, but Keir Starmer has just kind of got a bit of a free rein to do whatever he wants.
The institutions know the direction they're meant to be moving in.
Yeah, which certainly shows
the anointed guy.
Certainly shows where the actual power centre of British politics is. It's whoever's got Tony Blair's back. But some of the other stuff that was going on with this was that in a brief before the speech, but one that wasn't given in the speech, was that he wants a target for 1 in 10 civil servants to be working in a digital or data role by 2030 and 2,000 new digital specialist apprentices by the same date. And in the speech itself, he gave a new recommitment to further using AI and digital services for a lot of this. Now,
is that to monitor all the extra data they're collecting on us all the time?
Well,
data's only any good if you've got all people monitoring it and AI.
It's a greater digital hub for them to collect all of our information. Obviously, Tony Blair being behind a lot of this, he wanted the sort of digital passports. He wants the large digital infrastructure, which on a certain level, for most people, I'm sure, will make many things more convenient.
If you remember,
on a day-to-day
Tony Blair tried
basis.
to bring in physical ID cards when he was in government.
He's never let it go.
He's never let it go. At least he's been consistent in many areas.
He's been consistently evil in many areas. Oh,
yeah. And also, doesn't he look now in his face? It reminded me of a line from the Wilfred Owen poem, the war poem. You know, Dulcet et Decorum, a face like a devil sick of sin.
See, I'm always given to think of Gollum searching for the One Ring. You know, and it turns him into this hollowed out.
The longer he holds on to the ring of power, then the more it corrupts him.
Yeah. And so that's how I felt about Tony Blair. But anyway.
But clearly the intention is to create a digital centre hub for basically all of your government documents, all of your government records on one single app, or maybe 1 or 2 apps on your phone that the government can use to track everything for you. And again, for many people,
this will be convenient.
This will just be convenient. But when you're talking about a government like a Prime Minister like Keir Starmer, the actions that he's already taken, I would be very, very hesitant to be able to give over all of my information, access to all of these private records in one thing, especially when, if we look back to COVID and the lockdowns, when they were trying to talk about things like lockdown vaccine passports and such, you're handing over an immense amount of power that the government does not yet already have. They've already got an immense amount of power over you, but they want more power to be able to continually track you, lock you down, censor you for things.
Well, there's a great saying, I think, from which we need to slightly amend from America, that you'll always be asked to give up your freedoms for security or convenience. And if you're willing to give up your freedoms for security, you will end up with neither freedom nor security. And that's where we're heading very, very fast. And also, what an opportunity for the Chinese or the North Koreans or anyone else to hack that information.
It's assuming we don't just outsource it to them anyway. We nearly sold the infrastructure of the...
It'll probably be done in India anyway, through Infosys, won't it?
Yeah. But we nearly sold the communication infrastructure to China. So what are we doing?
Well, we've sold the Royal Mail to the Czech Republic, haven't we?
Yeah, there's nothing.
Well, I mean...
Yeah, there's nothing...
We can't fall out with them now, can we?
No,
They'll be opening our mail.
Yeah, I bet we will.
Another country we can't fall out with.
Yeah, I know.
Disagree with them.
Anyway, so go on.
Yeah, so to carry on with a little bit of this, again, to show just how easy it is for Keir Starmer with his backing to just do this, they mention in this independent article that in a surprise move, the leader of the party which founded the NHS announced he would abolish the independent Quango. It was a surprise move that he announced it, and in a statement that they gave to the Independent, they basically said they had no idea. Union bosses hit out of the way the PM announced the job losses, with NHS England sources telling the Independent they were given no notice and that there were gasps in the office when the news broke. So presumably they just heard, oh, by the way, you're probably going to be fired.
Yeah.
Can you imagine any private sector employer treating their employees like that, and where Keir Starmer and his Labour Party, it is again the rank hypocrisy, isn't it? And when they were against 0 hours contracts, and it turned out that most of them were in Labour head office, weren't they? The people on 0 hours.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
Yeah, you remember?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But
rules for thee, but not for me, come to mind.
Funnily enough, the former Tory health minister James Bethell tweeted out after this saying, "I wish we'd had the guts to do this."
You mean Lord Bethell?
Yeah, Lord Bethell. Well, why didn't you?
Yeah.
If you wanted to do this...
14 years.
But aren't we all seeing now a lot of former so-called Conservative advisors? They're all... The policy is the same as under the Conservatives. They're moving straight back into Starmer's government as advisors in exactly the same position. Whether it was advising Theresa May on her Brexit deal...
It's a continuation of the same agenda, just with
different
mask over it.
Coming back to that Defence and Securities Union, was it Powell, who was under the Conservatives, advisor, civil servant in Defence, refused to come to the Defence Select Committee and answer questions? He said, "I'm not coming." You may. Civil servant just refuses to come.
Who do you think you are?
Who do you think's running the? You think you're running the country?
Well, they do think that. They do think that.
Well, the MPs are clearly misguided if they think they're running the country, because the civil
servants bloody
they're running it. They are.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to things like the New Britain plans with the unitary authorities, I believe it was the Tories who began to make changes and restructure the local council layout, the way that they were structured in 2022 or 2023. I forget exactly which year it was, but they shut down a load of local councils and reformatted it so that there were larger authorities that were more centralised as well. So you are right, it's absolutely the same agenda throughout these governments.
The thing is, you can see that this is just the system retrenching itself and creating a more effective version of itself.
Well, it's bureaucratic managerialism where they're tinkering with the numbers and the levers to see how efficient that they can
exactly.
make it.
It's
but
the
ultimately
system.
It's going to the same goal.
Hadn't Starmer's Labour government, they've been introducing a new Quango a week?
Yes.
I think there've been 20 since they came into office.
Yeah, about
government.
nearly one a week. I mean, these are NGO, effectively not Quangos, quasi-autonomous non-government organisation. They're there, whatever election results are, and he's doing exactly what Blair did in embedding in the system things that can never be changed. And they're going to go on with the budget, taking powers away from an elected parliament, which has little enough power already.
And this is the point that Liz Truss...
And it won't matter what happens at the next general election, because the direction of travel has been set.
Or any government that came in would have to do something just absolutely insanely radical.
I seem to remember that was Francis Maud, the bonfire of the Quangos.
Yes.
Remember that? What happened? It was more of a damp squib in the end, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No.
Because I
wasn't even a barbecue.
I think that some senior civil servants were sat them down. Look, if you do this, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. We're going to do all of these things, and basically, at the end of your career,
and you'll see some bad things about you in the paper.
Exactly, your reputation will be trashed, and so you're just not going to do it. And they sit there and go, you know what? I'm probably not going to do it. And that's it.
Well, I was told something very interesting by a former special branch officer I was doing some work with on the tracking down the child trafficking into the UK, and he said, the bodyguards that the royals and the senior politicians get? He said, they're not there just to protect them. They're there to spy on them. He said that every week you're on that duty, you have to do a handwritten report of everywhere your target's been and all the people they've met and any compromat. And they're handwritten. They never go on computers. And they used to go in green files at the end of the week, and they're called the confidential greens, and they go off to MI5 special branch, and that's where the compromat comes on all the... I was thinking about, Boris Johnson. I mean, you wouldn't have a file. You'd have a whole library every week.
I can't imagine there's nothing on Boris.
I mean, by the end of the week, we've got him.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Sorry, carrying on with this. So, for people watching who might not actually know what NHS England is, again, it is a Quango, the quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisation, and it was set up it says in this article, October 2013. Since then, it and the Department of Health and Social Care have contained many teams of officials who do basically the exact same thing. And, for example, each has a dedicated team covering different areas of care, such as GP services, mental health, and urgent and emergency care. Starmer said in his speech that, is it a good idea for the front line of the NHS to get rid of 2 sets of comm teams, 2 sets of strategy teams, 2 sets of policy teams, where people are basically doing the same thing? Yes, it is. So it does seem that this was just a big bureaucratic mess.
I think there's something a bit darker here. I think there's a lot of people in NHS England who've had their fingers in the blood over the COVID response, and I think a lot of them would be very glad to get out of that organisation and scatter.
Potentially, because up to 15,300 people are potentially going to be losing their jobs over this. And similarly, it just seems that it did cause... Well, I mean, they are blaming the wait times, the waiting lists, the problems with the NHS on the entrenched bureaucracy that existed within NHS England, and bringing all of that back under direct control of the Department of Health and Social Care. I personally have a much more simple explanation for things like waiting lists, problems if you're going to A&E, and other problems with the NHS, which is just simply there are too many people in this country. But they don't want to address that, so instead they're going to lay it all on this and abolish this so that they can further centralise again. Not that I necessarily thought that some arm's length at Quango was a fantastic idea in the first place, because I imagine it too got filled with Blairites almost immediately.
What
like
kind
most
of person becomes a civil servant? What kind of person joins a Quango? It's always the same kind of person. You're never going to get... You would have to pay... if you wanted someone actually good in these things, you would have to pay them a lot of money, and you would have to give them a kind of level of freedom, intellectual freedom at the very least, and moral freedom that is going to dissuade them from ever joining these things.
You're not going to get many radical thinkers bringing revolutionary change to... I mean, but in business, you're expected to, improve your efficiency by, 5% a year, else you're dead.
Yep.
You can't do what you did last year and think you're going to make the same money next year because
exactly. There is accountability. There is a bottom line that you have to be held accountable to in business. Whereas in government, there's nothing. So what kind of people does it attract?
I mean, the bureaucracy's ultimate goal always ends up being just ensuring the survival of the bureaucracy.
Yes.
And the civil servants always did that, that their first duty was to maintain themselves, because you could have a radical government in for a while who might say, we want to reduce the size of the civil service, and they would resist that on the basis, well, the next government might want us to be bigger, in which case we've got to be able to have that capacity, so we've got to resist. But I mean, I've had whistleblowers in the civil service come to me, which in various government departments, and he said that when a policy comes down from the cabinet secretary, from the government to the cabinet secretary, down to the Department of Civil Servants, there were what they called resistance meetings of how they were going to oppose it, and that was at every single layer of the of the civil service. He said the ministers didn't know about any of these, and he went to some of these resistance meetings, and it was basically how the civil servants were going to block and delay that policy.
It's got a will of its own.
And
It's always, that's the old saying, isn't it? It doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always get in, and they are the government, aren't they? They're always there.
No, that's exactly. Yeah, that is the problem.
Like the factory cat.
Yeah,
it's always there.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, I do expect that what you're talking about there, which is the resistance of the civil servants to wider changes, is why that they're trying to re-centralise it under the Department of Health and Social Care under Wes Streeting anyway. Because, of course, whether or not they are bureaucracy that does get in the way and make things more inefficient, they also are presumably highly lazy and don't want things to change. So getting them out of the way makes it easier to implement even more of the centralised digital infrastructure.
Well, I'm all for governments around the world should share best practice, and I think best practice is what Elon Musk is doing, a Department of Government Efficiency. Who could possibly be against that? But we're not going to do it in this country because the absolutely outrageous spending, waste and corruption would be far greater in this country than we're seeing in America. And it's almost unbelievable in America, isn't it? Some of the things that the money is going
absolutely.
on. But I mean,
it's
surely
10 times worse here.
Yes.
But again,
10 times worse, and they're not going to do it, are they? And that's what would really upset the civil servants, and that shows you who's really in control.
But I think, again, what this probably was NHS England, by kind of operating as its own authority, of bureaucratic authority, when you want to push through these massive digital infrastructure changes, might have caused a block to it, or at least a speed bump to it. So you want to push it through as quickly as possible. So you just get rid of it, put it all under the same centralised department under Wes Streeting, and then you start to push through things like this.
What could possibly go wrong? It's all under Wes Streeting.
I know. Well, and he's being advised by somebody very interesting. But so what Tony Blair wants is he wants, similar to the unitary authorities, a new network of super primary care centres serving up to 250,000 patients. He said last year in a report for the Tony Blair Institute that current primary care networks look after populations of between 30,000 and 50,000, but the NHS England should take steps to increase that figure to 250,000. So
that was coming through years ago. So he was already influencing the previous Conservative government because that was on the cards and that was the way it was going years ago. That was the direction of travel.
Perhaps, given that they're named explicitly in this report, perhaps they were pushing back, being lazy, saying, no, we don't want to do that. That's a lot of work. So they've just gone, fine, we'll abolish you then, and we'll get it straight under us and we'll push it through ourselves.
But having been in politics for 15-odd years, I mean, everything to do with NHS reform, it just goes in cycles. You get rid of one layer of bureaucracy, you bring in your new one, and then you have a review, and then it fails, and then you go round again. And it's all about, we're doing something. We're doing something.
Well, this abolishing process could still, it said, take up to about 2 years. And even then, Keir Starmer has given no concrete plan, no steps of how this is going to
be very good redundancy packages.
Oh, I'm sure. But there's no step-by-step process been given, no plan given for, okay, how exactly will this improve hospital waiting times, waiting lists for surgeries, all of the things...
So no targets or anything, or we have to achieve this by then.
Well, by the end of the speech, he was being asked by some of the journalists in the crowd, okay, what processes will this free up that will improve the system, that will improve waiting times? And he was just saying, we'll get rid of the bureaucracy and then it'll shore up and allow working people more money in their pocket, because apparently it's going to save £500 million a year, which is just slightly less than 1 day's worth of NHS spending anyway.
And also nowhere near the tax hikes that Rachel Reeves put upon us in the budget.
Well, remember, apparently, according to Rachel Reeves, the reason we've got no economic growth is Donald Trump and Elon Musk.
Is that Rachel from accounts, or was it Rachel from complaints?
I think she flits between the two, wouldn't you say?
In the interest of time, though, I think we have to move on.
Oh, yeah, no, that's fine. Just to point out as well that the person...
Only Keir Starmer would move on.
The person who'd been pushing all of this behind the scene was Alan Milburn, the former health secretary under Tony Blair, who was on Tony Blair's side, and he has been advising Wes Streeting on this for a long time. And everything that Wes Streeting is doing...
Is Blair the the UK Obama, is he?
Yes, he's
the power behind the throne.
Yeah, he's the Dark Lord.
Yeah.
That's
In the sort of online right circles, he's just called the Dark Lord because his fingerprints are on everything. He is behind everything.
As opposed to Mandelson, who was just the Prince of Darkness, wasn't he?
He is. He is indeed. Yeah, but again, it's not. I don't think it's a coincidence. It's Mandelson is the ambassador. Donald Trump.
I thought the Americans weren't accepting his credentials.
They don't, but you know that Blair was like, get him out.
Well, you know that that they tried to make Obama the American ambassador in London, and we never accepted. That's why we went so. Yes, that's why we went so long with no ambassador under Biden.
Interesting,
because we rejected.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.